We'd like to welcome all of our panelists today. Thank you guys for being a part of our panel this afternoon. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Good. Thanks for having us. Thanks, Iman. Wonderful introductions.
Wonderful to be here.
You guys are wonderful women, so it's easy to introduce. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to have some general questions, which we'll have each panelist answer so we get multiple perspectives on the same topics. Then we'll go into some specific questions that kind of touch on what each panelist has highlighted throughout their careers or in their interests. And then we'll open it up for some Q&A components. So first, we're going to start with a question about influence and inspiration and how sports have really contributed to these women's lives. So the question is, how have sports influenced and shaped your life, whether that is as a person in general or how you are specifically as a woman or how you see yourself as a woman? We're going to start with Tasha. Tasha, how do you think sports have influenced you?
I think fencing has really influenced me in giving me the confidence to kind of put myself out there, to be vulnerable, to learn how to succeed, and also to learn how to fail. I think that's a really important life skill to learn, to know that you can try your best and you may not get that result, but then to have the resilience to come back the next day and try again. And so I think that's definitely what fencing has given me. It carries over into my professional life and my personal life. You know, it's good to learn that it's okay to make a bad decision as a mom and try again the next day and do better with your kids. So that's definitely what fencing has given me.
Yeah, I love those points, kind of the idea of like trying and having to try again and being resilient. And I do believe, like you said, it kind of affects every part of your life. We're going to move on to our next panelist who will answer the same exact question, but just give us your perspective on it. We're going to go with Stacey. Stacey, how have sports and maybe fencing specifically influenced you in your life as a person and possibly as a woman?
Sure. First, Iman, I have to have some gratitude. I want to thank you for moderating today. I want to, and I see so many people that I know and recognize. It's so good to see everybody. I want to thank Chris and USA Fencing, and I saw that Peter was on the line, and I just really want to let you all know how grateful I am to be here with all of you. Hi, Peter. And so I often tell people that my life really has been a double thread, especially from the point of 1980 forward. My two paths have been higher education and sport. And all along the way, as I learned things in sport, it impacted and helped me in a myriad of ways in my higher education path. So I think what's so powerful and what's incredible about sport is that all of it, it's moving and it's back and forth and it's forever. I am still learning things in sport that helps me in my work in higher education and in the community that I serve here in San Antonio, Texas. So that to me is really the good news about sport. As Tasha mentioned, resilience, but there's also, you know, the ability, long-term planning, friendships that help you make it through difficult times. And so it's forever. And it's still helping me, and I'm still enjoying. And for example, spending time with you today, Iman, I haven't had the pleasure and opportunity. And I'll just finish. I want to thank Brandon also today for all of his work in getting this set up. I think it's fabulous that you're hosting these events. I think it will be a very powerful tool for the organization.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think I really appreciated your points about the kind of lifelong learning in addition to the lifelong skills that you gain via sport. I like to think of sport as like a microcosm for life, and you get to experience so much and learn so much about yourself and about others through it. So thank you for sharing that. We're gonna go finally to Jennifer. Jennifer, what would you say is the impact of sports on your life as a person or as a woman?
Certainly, I echo what Tasha was saying, the resiliency factors. There's so many things you learn from participating in sport, and Stacey, heartfelt gratitude to people on this call and the people willing to create an online community in a pandemic. Community for me is what has been the common thread throughout fencing. I started out at Carolina on a team, went to Oregon and was part of that first women's Sabers push that I'm sure Stacey will talk about later. And then now I'm back in Durham, and I call what I've been doing the past decade is building a fighting community. So the community component is what's kept me in through the hard times. W Fencing, the community of women that are coming together is another thread to that. These lifelong friendships, these connections, this network is pretty powerful and pretty significant.
Absolutely. And I believe like something that we're doing right now is also kind of further engaging in that community. I think fencing is a lot about community, and what you learn from that community and what you can gain from engaging that community is super important. And I really appreciate you for highlighting that point. I think each one of you really highlighted a different component, idea that it kind of teaches you things, but it also kind of teaches you things continuously throughout your life, kind of turns you into this learner or student of sport and of challenges, and also invites you into this community that you can either receive things from and also invest in and create more of. So thank you all for sharing those insights. We're going to move into the next general question, which is about the challenges I guess you guys kind of might have faced in sport and in fencing. So the question specifically is, was there a time that you felt that you were treated differently, or treated in a biased way based on your perceived gender? If you can, or would be open to sharing that with us, as well as your thoughts on the situation, or in general, your thoughts about the difference in treatment in sport between people who are perceived as women, people who are not, that would be awesome. So we're going to start again with Tasha. Do you think there's been a moment where you specifically have been treated differently, or where you notice treatment that's different based on gender?
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, my cat is joining us today as well. But so I remember a specific time, a specific example of refereeing, being the strip ref and having a male video ref behind me, and making a call that a coach was not happy with, and argued with a little bit. We went to video, came back, upheld the call. And then after the bout, had a conversation with the coach again. And I was trying to explain, the rationale for why I made this call. And the coach was just not, we weren't seeing it the same way. And then the coach turns to my video ref, who was a man, and he gave the exact same rationale for the call, the exact same explanation I did. And then the coach was like, okay, thank you. That makes sense. And so that was just a glaring example of where I felt not very respected as a woman. And I've also, I felt that way in the ref cadre as well. Like I've been challenged for not supporting a call that a male referee has made, just in terms of like a video backup, and have been kind of admonished for, not agreeing with them, even though they got to make the call. I just voiced my opinion. And so I felt that I wasn't allowed to be voicing my opinion. So I've definitely experienced that multiple times. I've seen it, and it's unfortunate. I think it's getting better, but those are kind of the specific times that I can remember feeling that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with you. And I think that specific sentiment and vivid reality of doing the same exact thing and clearly being treated differently occurs for, I think, a lot of women. At least for me, I think as a woman, specifically a Black woman, I know times where I've celebrated more or celebrated extensively, and not to the degree of a man or maybe even my teammate in the same match, right? I would get chastised more in a very clear way. And I really appreciated your comments because it was very explicit, right? There's no ambiguity as to what was happening. The same question was asked twice to two people. I really appreciate you for sharing that. And yes, sometimes it's very overt, and it's not, people don't, it's not really shied away from in their criticism or extra criticism of women. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to move next to Stacey. So Stacey, the same question for you. If you're comfortable, would you be able to share a moment where you felt as though you were treated differently based on gender, or you witnessed different treatment based on gender, and your thoughts about that?
Sure.
So, yeah.
I think I want to put it in context because in about my age and the journey kind of that I've traveled is in the 70s, from the 70s till, about 84 was my competitive time period. And you have to remember that at that time period, for example, in high school, when it rained, the girls had to go downstairs and play jacks and the guys got the gym. There was only one weapon. And so it was very difficult. It was constantly seeking equity at that time. And things started to get a little bit better after Title IX. And I was the first of 200 women in the state of California to get that scholarship. But let's fast forward into the time period which I was really working hard to get women Saber. So that was 2000 to 2004. I was physically threatened. A Russian threatened to kill me. I was prevented by Iranians from going up in the elevator to my room. Hungarians were very upset with me that I was working to get Women's Saber on the program. And even as late as 8 years ago, when the Women in Fencing Council was formed, the president of the FIE told me very directly that women were very good at administrative things, but not being leaders. And then finally, I think I would bring it all the way up to today, when I think many of you have probably seen the story of Yoshi Mori, the president of the Tokyo Olympics, that my dear friend Marani, who serves with me on the council, sent us, that said that the president of the Olympic Games thought that women talked too much and weren't good on committees. So for a woman that is my age and has traversed kind of the history that I have with fencing, you've encountered just about everything. And it's very difficult. And so there is much more work to be done. And let me tell you, internationally particularly. But so I think having sensitivity about that for everyone that's involved in the sport is important. And also kind of a personal commitment for all of us to be here to hopefully make sure that it doesn't happen for the next generation of women.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that experience. It sounds pretty traumatic, honestly. And I don't think anyone maybe in this room today, or the younger generation or the newer generation of fencers would even imagine that something to that degree would happen, like as threats or physical obstruction. The comment you mentioned about people saying that women speak too much, I think that women in all areas of fencing have gotten that comment. I've gotten that comment. And to your point, it's as if when we try to simply advocate for ourselves or for the inclusion of ourselves in the sport and participation wise, because as you mentioned, you helped getting women's saber into the Olympics. And just for everyone's knowledge, women's saber, I believe, was in 2000 or 2004, the first Olympics. And
It was
women's epee,
2004, yeah.
women's epee wasn't an Olympic sport until 1996. And I don't think most people know that fencing in the Olympics for women for anything other than foil was very new, despite the fact that fencing is one of the first modern Olympic sports. It took a century plus to have women included, and clearly, as Ms. Johnson has identified, a lot of obstruction and adversity to do so. So I mean, we really appreciate you enduring those things, which you should not have to endure to kind of get some sort of equality or equal standing for women in the sport. We're going to move on to Jennifer. Jennifer, have you experienced gender-based discrimination in fencing or in sports in general? Or have you seen it? And what are your thoughts on it?
Yes, all of the above. I was raised believing I could do anything that I wanted. Both of my parents said over and over again, you have opportunity that your mother did not. You can do anything. And I believed this naively. It was when I decided to go into coaching that I started looking for other role models and seeing what other women were out there. And Nikki Frank at Temple was the role model. And I knew that this path would be an unusual path. I knew I could go into the field that I was trained in. I'm trained as a counseling psychologist, which is just flooded with women. I like to move and I loved fencing. So I made a conscious choice to go into a field where there were not many women, not knowing what I would experience, but with the belief that I could do anything that I want. I believe that Mid-South Fencers came into an existence because there was not the opportunity for me to grow and develop as a coach. Women were good with the children, and I wanted to develop an athlete. And as I talked and networked, there was not an opportunity. Same thing in the NCAA world, was not the opportunity. I just was not seen as a woman as having the physical ability to coach. And this was said directly, and this was indirectly said to me by people who I love and trust. So I knew that I had to prove myself. And so I opened up the club and just started collecting like energy and was just persistent and didn't believe what other people had told me in which they didn't think that I could do. And I just did it. I just worked hard. And this is no different than a man. You have to believe in your vision. You have to put in a lot of time and a lot of grit. And once I reached a level of success, I could feel the threat of me being an anomaly. And the best way to describe it is, you know, when you're walking along the path and you're hiking with some friends and you're like, yeah, and you're having a good time, then you hit that spider web and you're like, ah, trying to get it off. And like, where's the bug? Where's the bug? It's for women, it's like you hit a huge spider web and you can't get it off. And you're like, where's that spider? And you're afraid of getting bit. And so that's an extra thing that we have to deal with, is just extra parts of our trail are not cleared. And we have to, at this point, help each other clear a path, is the best analogy. And women and men have to work together for the benefit of our team, Team USA. We don't have all the brightest and best people because of these spider webs that are prohibiting growth. We have to find ways to grow better, stronger together.
Yeah, I love how you kind of emphasize this idea of, it's not, people like to say that women aren't in leadership positions because they may not be good enough, right? Or they aren't as good as the men, right? But oftentimes in many different areas, it is simply that they are obstructed from the opportunities and the positions in which they can demonstrate their abilities, in addition to being able to improve them. And I think you made it very clear. And then even when they do get into those positions, your spiderweb analogy really emphasizes the idea that as a coach, as a referee, as a fencer, there's so many other things that you then have to take into consideration that might obstruct your ability to be successful in what you're trying to do. Yeah, that was a beautiful imagery metaphor for kind of the experience of transgressing areas which people are actively trying to prevent you from engaging in. Thank you for that. So we're going to move into the next section, which will be a specific question section. So we've created a question for each one of our panelists that specifically highlights their area of information or knowledge or experience, you could say. So we're going to start with Tasha. And Tasha, your question will be, can you tell us about your role in the RC? You've already highlighted a little bit, but the challenges that women referees have overcome and currently face in our sport. Also, for everyone's information, I think most of us are aware that there are way fewer female referees than male referees. And as Tasha's already highlighted, they are treated differently, and their authority as authority figures isn't taken as solidly, or isn't taken with as much integrity. So Tasha, could you give us some perspective or information on that?
Sure. I mean, the role is of the RC chair. It kind of supervise. There's multiple subcommittees of the RC. So we have domestic development, international development and assignments, domestic hiring, rules, and the ombudsman committee. And so with all of those committees, the RC works to award referee classifications, to develop referees, develop information, seminars and exams for referees. We also conduct hearings for code of conduct or code of ethics breaches. We submit candidates for FIE licensure, and assigning referees to international competitions. And, one thing that I think we haven't seen in a long time is that we have more females as vice chairs or in the RC that we have had in the past. So we have Kelly Kaler for international development assignment. We have Sue Borges for ombudsman. We have Ann Crockett for domestic hiring. And then myself as our RC chair. And I know we've had female RC chairs in the past, but it's been a long time. And so one of the things that I have wanted to look at in my time as RC chair is I wanted to look at the discrepancy between female refs to male refs, and also persons of color. And I think we're starting to address this more with the DEIB group, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging group. And I advocated to have an RC liaison on that resource group. So I'm on that committee now. And I've also asked, we're trying to kind of make diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging a part of like every aspect of USA fencing. And so I think we're going to start small, but I've asked that we have liaisons for the DEIB group in our RC subcommittees. So I think specifically domestic development and domestic hiring. So we want to look at this equity and inclusion, promote more female representation for referees. And I think it also starts with, getting more female athletes, first of all, because no one just kind of jumps into refereeing like, I've never done fencing before, I think I want to ref it. So you build from within, right? And so we have to build our female athletes, and then we have to, provide leadership and mentorship to encourage them to either ref while they're competing or once they're done competing, to find a way to give back to the sport. And that's what I would like to see. And that's why I got into it. I mean, I remember seeing Stacey ref when I was competing and seeing her out there as one of the very few female referees, her and Sharon Everson and Vinnie Bradford, like they were inspiring to me, like, oh, they can do it. And I could see them in tough situations. And so I want for other, young female refs or athletes to see like, oh, we can have women in these positions and you can succeed and you can be respected. I think I kind of babbled, but otherwise.
I mean, excellent points. I really like the point where you mentioned not only top down, but bottom up reinforcement and inclusion of women. Like you said, having more members of influence and on boards and in positions in which they can create opportunities, and more people simply in the sports so that they can accept and reach out for these opportunities. In addition to the comment you made about having people around you in these different positions that represent part of your identity, I've definitely experienced the feeling of just having someone who I can identify with as a coach, as a ref, as an official, right, at a tournament eases my feelings of being hyper aware of my identity in that space and having to myself think about whether or not it will be discriminated against or whether or not I am comfortable and accepted in this environment. Just having that visible and actionable presence of women is very, very important for both the people who are on these positions so that they're not alone, like Jennifer has mentioned, but also for the people who are in the sport and participating in the sport as athletes to feel as though they are supported and represented. Thank you for that. We're gonna move on to Stacey. Stacey, we want you to talk about a little bit more about changing the Olympics. You definitely highlighted a lot of what that was like for you. But kind of, if you could expand a little bit more upon what the process was like to get women's saber including the Olympic Games, and like what challenges you faced and how did it feel when you were able to accomplish it, and possibly, the challenges afterwards. I think a lot of times people think that once something is official or instated that the problems cease, right? When Barack Obama became president, racism ceases, right? When women's saber's now in the Olympics, there's no more discrimination between women's and men's saber. So if you kind of illuminate the before and the after components of what that experience was like.
Sure. And before I do that, I just want to give a shout out to Tasha and say, when we were reffing, you could only ref if you were the very highest elite athletes. And there was a double standard going on there because that wasn't the case for the men. But you're on the right path and you're doing the right things. And so I just want to give you a big stroke for the work that you're doing and thank you for what you're doing because you're headed in the right direction. In terms of my story about that process, I want to say that if you want to be in leadership, you have to play the long game. I was vice president for USA Fencing when we were working with many people, Sam Chera, Steve Sobel, to get women's epee on the program in Atlanta. And then subsequent to that was when I became president, 2000, 2004. Before I became president, There's a saying that Bill Gates uses. He says the first thing that you have to do is to research everything that's out there about what's been done and who else has been successful. So I was on the NGB Council and I studied other sports, and luge had gone from being nowhere in the international governing body to being having a president and many people within the international governance structure. So I did my research. I wrote a grant to the U.S. Olympic Committee at the time to get money to support the effort of when I first came in as president. The first thing I said, if I'm going to try to get women's saber on the program, I'm going to need to have the governance structure have as many Americans as was possible. And so that had been kind of unheard of to that point in time. I said we were going to put an American up for every position on the FIE. And that had to be all done before I became president, because when you become president, you take over right after the Olympic Games is finished. And by September, you have to have all the names into the FIE, and in November is the Congress. So this was kind of the first audacious thing, is that we were going to do this. And there was a lot of people who disagreed with me, but we did it. And lo and behold, we got an American on every single commission and council. And the other thing is through that process, I really started to work with the Pan American countries. There was 28 votes there. And I said, you know, if you work with me, we'll support your candidacies within the FIE. And so we, through the money that came from the USOC, were to hold receptions and to schmooze and to get people to support our candidates. And so we did that for like, you know, a year or two before the actual voting happened. And so you really have to kind of think very long-term and strategically. So once we had all the Americans in place, then we started this incredible communication, because when we actually got up to the vote, and I want to say, I don't remember exactly, but let's say that there was, 148 countries. We only won that by 7 votes. And that never could have happened had we not have been operating as this very strong team. I remember in one of the congresses leading up to it, it was so fantastic. Americans were everywhere, and we were communicating with each other. We were saying where there were the problems, who I needed to go talk to. I mean, all these different things that were going on behind the scenes before the vote actually came. Every time there was, I had to write a gazillion letters because, for example, the Italians would send out a letter and say, well, the women aren't ready, and this is, well, I would have to refute that. So constantly being on task until it happened. And then, you know, once we got to the Olympic Games and once the ladies were there, I mean, Mariel and Seda were so incredible. And there was a photograph that was taken of the women on the podium. And I don't know how this happened, but in the background, I'm in the background, and there's about 20 or 30 people who had helped to get this done, kind of grayed out in the background. And if that wasn't the truth of the story, because it took all of us. It wasn't any individual. It was all of us working together to make this happen. And not only make it happen, but to ensure that they got fair refereeing all along the way, because we had enough Americans in place to make sure that our, weapons were in the best state possible, that we knew we had everything wired, that we had the director of technique wired. We had everybody in place, because that's what it takes to make it happen. And the other thing is, for me, on a personal note, I think a lot of people know that I was a 1980 athlete, and I did not get to compete in the games. And for me, on a personal level, when the women won, and by the way, when the women won, it broke a psychological barrier for the United States. Peter Westbrook was, and Peter and I are relatively the same age, but he was the lone ranger in terms of winning medals. It had been 100 years since women had won a medal. And so this ability to say, yes, you can do it, impacted all the other weapons. So once women had success, it brought success to the other weapons as well. And that's something that's very important, is that success breeds success all across the board. And so, so anyway, I think that's probably enough of that, but mostly to say it requires everybody rowing together, and that it isn't any one person's doing, but it's rather that it was a big team effort that worked very well.
Before I even respond to any of that, I would like to ask a follow-up question, which is, I think for everyone to know, what were the arguments against having women saber in the Olympics? Because for someone like me who's never experienced or known of fencing to not have all the sports in the Olympics, maybe not all at the same time, but what were even the arguments to justify preventing women from fencing saber?
They're the same arguments that were utilized for 8 years while I've been serving on the council to keep women from getting more than 30% of the governance, ability to represent 30% of the governance structure within the FIE. And that is, I start to get kind of passionate about it because it still makes me angry to this day, but I try to not let that anger really get to me. But what they said was the evolution of the sport, the women weren't ready. They were like children. That's exactly how the Hungarians phrased it. They could not represent the sport appropriately in an international arena. They said that, no, they have to wait and there has to be more tournaments and more activity for the sport to be more ready to bring it to the Olympic platform. But really, it's about exclusion. It's about wanting to keep people out. And remember, too, with Saber, if you think about the historical development of Saber, officers in the military were the saberists. And so they became, as the years went by, leaders. Many of the leaders of the FIE came out of that weapon. And so this was kind of like, the last bastion, Saber, to bring that onto the platform. Foil, traditional, teaching weapon, dueling, okay, we'll give them that. But Saber, that was really, to them, I think, a great threat. And of course, the women fenced beautifully, all of the women from all over the world, and completely refuted that in the end game.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to highlight some of the things that you said in your comments. One of the big things I think everyone probably took from that was this idea of integration and community and integration. Having a large community of people who are aligned or who can come on to your mission, and then placing them in positions of influence in which they can impact that decision. Not only reaching out to those people, but also organizing those people, as you mentioned. And in addition, talking about the idea that you didn't want women in women's saber, kind of the same arguments used against like women's suffrage, this idea of being like too much like children, or they're never going to be ready, or I don't know if you guys caught her saying that they wouldn't let more than 30% of women in leadership positions, kind of going back to Jennifer's comments of this idea that it's literally about preventing women from having the opportunities to excel, right? They're saying that they need to be better. Women need to be better in saber, but won't let them have the platform like in Olympic Games to improve their skills to be better, which means that they would just have to have some miraculous talent or effort in order to achieve the standards that they are setting for women in the sport. But yes, I loved everything that you said. Thank you for sharing that and illuminating us kind of the issues that women have faced historically for a long time, and then also at this point of a kind of a turnover, as you said. Once women demonstrated that they were great in Saber in this sport, it then led to more leadership positions. And it also led to other areas, men and women in other areas becoming better. And that is a really, really important point, I think, also about diversity, right? When you have one area of people who do well, it helps everyone do well. Diversity, equity, and inclusion helps every single person in a system. It's not simply about that one identity. It's just allowing everyone to excel to their greatest extent and inspire and motivate one another. But thank you for all of that, Stacey.
Amen.
We're going to move to our last specific Q&A question, which is for Jennifer. I think kind of in similar tones as what Stacey said. Why do you believe, you mentioned it a little bit before, why do you believe there are so few women head coaches in club fencing? What are the biggest barriers to change today? And what do you think we can do to bring about those change, whether it's, as Tasha mentioned, through top-down reinforcement and engagement, or through bottom-up type initiatives?
Tasha, I agree 100%. We have to do both. We have to nurture from the bottom up, and we have to look at the top and go down. And Stacey, what she was talking about is really inspiring. And if you haven't been to an international event and represented the United States, she was really talking about our role in the world. And I see and have taken myself very seriously when I've represented Team USA as an athlete, as a coach. And when I was coaching the cadet women, we're all very different styles. And you mentioned the Hungarians. Just to see the Hungarians look at our team, just to see a different way of doing things, it's just, you just feel like you're in a different place and a different time of how you represent yourself. And what Stacey was doing, it was, the Americans were ahead, in women's saber, and they didn't want us to have an advantage. So it was about keeping that advantage away. And that same dynamic we're facing within ourselves. And it's not just in fencing. It's in the United States right now. And you said the word, Iman, you said the word systemic. And so we have to look at how our system cultivates coaches, cultivates referees, builds athletes, creates a strong team. Do we need one head coach? Do we need a team of coaches? Okay, we need to look completely differently at ourselves from where we did 20 years ago. It's not just one or two clubs that have the ability to produce a good athlete. We have dozens of clubs. And now we have to figure out, how do we create the brightest and the best team and go kick some butt, okay? We're getting ready to have a coaching shortage, okay? There's a gap. We need to be thinking now about 8 years from now, 12 years from now, 20 years from now. I'm not hearing those discussions. We discuss what the future plan, and we include ourselves in it. There is no other way for me other than for us to look at our whole system of operation. And we have this pause now. We have COVID, we have a break. Everyone's like, wow, it's kind of nice to have a weekend. But we have to use this time to make ourselves better and to plan. Specifics, a 2-year coaching education program. Let's recruit our NCAA, our top athletes, and offer them a way to train and get them with the brightest and best coaches. If you are on a national coaching team, you must give back to the community. What about a mentorship program? There's so many things that we could do. We just need the doers to sit at a table and plan and think and envision. And this is fun. we're interested to take that risk.
Yeah, definitely. It's really about strategic development and creating that infrastructure for people to take these opportunities. I think it really connects to everything kind of Tasha, Stacey, and Jennifer are saying. Like, not only there's barriers without a path. There are barriers, like you mentioned with the cobweb or the webs. There are multiple barriers in addition to there being no pathway for you to accomplish these goals that you have, just obstructions. And I think one of the big ways to change that, as you mentioned, is to create structure that also will create equality and equity, right? When there's no kind of centralized system for doing something, then the rule is like the rule of the road, the rule of the masses. And the masses at this point are dominantly probably white men, in addition to the fact that they may not all be open to women involvement and inclusion, as Stacey mentioned, was the case in the 2000s, which was only 20 years ago. As a fencer, I know that has not changed the perspective, particularly internationally, on women's fencing in general as being as viable as men's fencing, or as even being the same thing as fencing being men's fencing, right? But yes, definitely, I appreciate that kind of actionable note, which is kind of create the pathways, create the structure, create the leadership and the mentorship to bring these people up into these roles for not just today, but for 8, 10, 20 years from now. We're going to go through kind of our last question, which would be like a note, kind of 1 or 2 lines from each of you, just on the change over time in women's sports, or women's sports in general, or specifically fencing. Kind of what is one thing that you have really appreciated seeing so far, and one thing that you want to see, like Jennifer mentioned, in 10 years? And then we'll go into a quick Q&A section. So if Tasha, you can start us off with like 1 or 2 lines about what you have seen that you appreciated and what you want to see.
Yeah, one thing that I've seen, I think it was touched on earlier by Stacey, or maybe I saw it in the chat, is that, women actually get to fence to the same score as men now. I remember when I was starting, it was 10 touch bouts back then for DEs, and women got to go to 8. And I just remember thinking to myself, why? Like this is just absolutely ridiculous. So I'm happy to see that we have the equal opportunity to fence to 15 touches now. I'm happy to see that, we have more female representation in leadership. And, for Tokyo, we're sending a female referee, Kelly Kaler, if we have it. Like, she's the designee for the US. And it's been 24 years since we've sent a female ref to the Olympics. I think Jerry Baumgart was the last one in '96. And so, those are great things. And I'm really happy to see that, to see us push that. I think as what I want to see is I want to see more female representation. I want to see more female persons of color. We're making steps to have females in general in leadership roles, but we need to have more persons of color involved. And so, I think we need to, and also the LGBTQ community, we need to represent everyone. We need to incorporate diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in everything that we do. And so I want to see that in USA Fencing. I want to see that in all of our committees. I want to see that representation, and I want it to be heard, and I want it to be taken seriously. And I think we need to educate our community and about the importance of this. And it's too bad that we have to do that, but I think we really do. And that's what I would like to see. I would like to see more women, more persons of color, more LGBTQ people represented in USA Fencing.
Yeah, and I think something that you mentioned, Tasha, was seeing Stacey earlier on. And I think not only representation, but visibility of the people who are already doing it. I've spoken to people when I was, speaking about the Peter Westbrook Foundation, and someone mentioned, I think it was Pryor, who spoke about how the fact that he fenced for a large portion of his career, not even knowing that there were other Black people fencing. And that once he knew about it, he was like, why wouldn't anyone tell me that actually I can be an Olympian, because I see people who look like me being Olympians. I know, like, it wasn't until probably 2008 when I realized, wait a minute, Mario won 2 Olympic gold medals. Like, how is that not a bigger, more known thing? As a woman in fencing, I should be very, very aware of the fact that there are women in fencing, and American fencing, who are killing it, because that would inspire me to possibly put my goals higher, or at least understand that even if I face barriers both internally and externally as an athlete, right, that it is achievable because I can see it and it's been done. So to your point, not only increasing the representation, but increasing the visibility of those who are represented. Because if they're there but not visible, right, seeing is believing. They have to be visible to be able to touch and reach other people. Particularly when you talk about things like race, gender, and LGBTQ, and also other identities, particularly cultural identities and things of that sort, right? You can't be inspired by something or connect to something if you don't even know that it's there. So I think this panel is a great example of something that brings awareness and light to the people like Stacey, like you, Tasha, like you, Jennifer, who are already here doing the work and having done the work to inspire other people to continue doing that work. We're gonna, I got a little bit passionate, guys. We're gonna, I guess, Stacey, yeah, what is your kind of note on the things that you've seen that you like and the things that you want to see in the future? If you could give a couple words on that.
Sure. Well, think about the last Olympic Games, 2016 in Rio. There were 5,000 women who competed in 300 different sports. And that represented 45% of all athletes who were competing. As Peter Bouchard said in the chat, Tokyo is going to be the first games where fencing is full teams with equity, right? Because we've always had to rotate out. Now, this is one of the things that I do credit Usmanov with, is getting the final set of medals for us so that we can compete fully in these games. And so this is a very important moment. But where the work really needs to be is in governance, because if you have women in governance, things can change. Without them, they can't. And that's why I spent 8 years with my fabulous council fighting to get 30%, because we know from United Nations research that says if women can get to the 30 percentile, they can make the flywheel move themselves. But 20%, it's too difficult. They're always, there's not enough force together. And so with the 30%, we need to be sending all sorts of female representatives to stand for election, number one. And number two, we need to have as many women coaching. This is huge. And this is our biggest deficit, I'm sure, as Jennifer is aware of. And that's across many sports, by the way. It's not just fencing. So a focus on developing women coaches is absolutely imperative. And then all the other technical areas, referee, director of technique, all of this is key. I'm very happy that we're fortunate enough to have a wonderful leader in Chris. And but all of these things matter. And so we've made tremendous progress for athletes. Now we've got to look at the systemic structures that we have in place and really try to change those for greater inclusion of everybody.
Excellent. I also would love to connect what you said back a little bit to Jennifer as well, this idea of if you want longevity and foundational development, not just one person who beats all the odds and the gates will close behind them, because just like one person can be harassed, the next person can be harassed to the same degree, right? You need to build infrastructure that will allow people in the future to have an easier way or a clearer way to the same destination, which, as you mentioned, is what you do by creating leadership roles, right? The leadership roles are what prevents just having one person who happens to get past all the obstacles in a very specific ways, and allows for people 8 years from now, as Jennifer mentioned, this kind of timeline of longevity, 8, 10, 20 years from now, to develop upon those leadership roles and increase those leadership roles in addition to increasing their opportunities within the sport. So thank you for those comments. Jennifer, you're gonna hit us with the last zingers, the last juicy
super quick. I see the time. First, there have been many men who have seen my potential and believed in me and given me the opportunities. And they weren't necessarily the opportunities that I wanted, but I took those opportunities and I made them the best. And I'll give a shout out to Peter Burchard. He hired me for the Coaches Academy. And, I taught, and then he invited me back. I said, hey, can we try doing a process group? And he's like, huh? What's that? I said, it's when coaches get together and we talk about things and, we share our feelings. And he's like, but he let it happen. He's like, I don't know about this, but okay, run it. And then at the end, he's like, wow, that was really good. So we have to take chances and do things differently than we've done in the past. I think there's a lot of fear that if we change or something happens, that we're going to lose what we have. So there's fear and greed that we need to stop feeding. We need to feed the community. Feed that feeling of being on the podium and sharing with our whole team. We need to embrace all that is the United States, every region. We have a tremendous amount of diversity. Let's use it.
Great points to end on. I'd like to thank Tasha and Jennifer and Stacey for coming on here. I appreciated being on here and kind of working with US Fencing in their event and collaborating with the Aspire to Inspire initiative to highlight these voices through my presentation here, and also all of your lovely efforts to illuminate the experience that you've had and how they've added to the development of women in fencing, in addition to the struggles that you have faced